The dust swirled on Main Street as Nora Bennett clutched the crumpled letter in her trembling hands. The words regretfully decline, and insufficient means burning into her vision like brands on cattle. Standing before the grand Fairchild mansion that should have become her home in mere days, she realized that the man she'd agreed to marry had just rejected her not for who she was, but for what she lacked in her pockets. Sweetwater Creek, Colorado, 1879, was no place for a woman with empty coffers and a broken engagement. The town had watched her arrive 6 weeks ago, full of hope, and carrying little more than a carpetbag of possessions and her mother's cameo brooch. Now they would watch her fall. Tears burned her eyes as she turned away from the whitewashed mansion with its gleaming windows and polished door knocker. The promise of security that Edgar Fairchild had offered when he'd answered her advertisement in the Matrimonial Gazette had evaporated like morning dew. His letter explained that upon reviewing her financial situation, he found it incompatible with the lifestyle befitting a Fairchild bride. Nora hadn't lied, she'd been clear about her circumstances. Her father's death had left debts, not dollars. But Edgar had seemed so understanding in his letters, until he wasn't. She walked blindly down the dusty road, away from the prying eyes of townsfolk who already whispered about that mail-order bride who got sent back. Her rented room at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house awaited, but what then? The stage wouldn't leave for Denver for another week, and her meager funds would barely cover the fare. "Whoa there, madam, you're fixing to walk straight into my horse." Nora startled, looking up to find herself inches from a chestnut stallion's chest. Her gaze traveled upward to the man in the saddle, broad-shouldered, sun-bronzed, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners beneath the brim of a well-worn Stetson. "I apologize," she murmured, stepping aside on wobbly legs. The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the dirt. "No harm done." He studied her face with a frown. "Begging your pardon, but you look like you've just lost your best friend." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Just my future, sir, nothing of consequence." His eyes, a warm hazel that reminded her of autumn leaves, narrowed slightly. "Name's Roy Lawson. I manage the Triple R Ranch for Old Man Richardson, and I'm guessing you might be Miss Bennett, the lady who came to marry Edgar Fairchild." Heat rose to her cheeks. "Word travels fast in Sweetwater Creek. Small towns have big ears," Roy agreed, leading his horse beside her as she continued walking. "Mind if I walk with you a spell? Seems like you could use a friendly ear yourself." Nora considered refusing, but the genuine concern in his expression weakened her resolve. "I suppose there's no harm, Mr. Lawson, though I'm afraid I'm poor company today." They walked in silence for a moment, the only sounds the creak of his saddle leather and the soft thud of his horse's hooves behind them. "I heard Fairchild backed out," Roy finally said. "Man never did have much spine." "He claims I misrepresented myself," Nora replied stiffly. "Though in truth I told him from the start that I had no dowry to speak of. I thought," her voice caught, "I thought he valued companionship over coin," Roy snorted. "Edgar Fairchild values nothing but appearances, and his ledger books always has." They reached the white picket fence surrounding Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. Nora turned to him, curiosity momentarily displacing her humiliation. "You seem to know him well. We grew up together. Different sides of the creek, you might say. His daddy owned the bank, mine worked the land." Roy adjusted his hat. "Edgar always did think money made the man. Well, that explains his letter." Nora pulled it from her pocket, the paper now wrinkled from her tight grip. "He wrote that he couldn't possibly introduce a penniless bride to society." Roy's jaw tightened. "Man's a fool." "Perhaps," Nora sighed. "But a fool with a point. I have nothing to offer a husband. No money, no property, not even family connections since my parents passed." "That what you think marriage is? A business transaction?" Roy's voice held no judgment, only genuine curiosity. "Isn't it?" Nora asked, surprising herself with the bitterness in her tone. "My father always said a woman's greatest asset is a wealthy husband. When he died and left us with nothing but debts, I saw the truth in his words." Roy leaned against the fence post, regarding her thoughtfully. "My folks had nothing but a one-room cabin when they married. Pa always said they started rich in love and everything else followed." He smiled, a warm, genuine expression that reached his eyes. 42 years they had together before the fever took them both last winter. Something in his words struck a chord in Nora's heart. They sound like remarkable people. They were. His eyes softened with memory. Pa used to say marrying for money was like buying a horse for its saddle, mighty foolish when it's the heart of the beast that matters. Despite herself, Nora laughed. "Your father had quite a way with words, Mr. Lawson." "Roy," he corrected. "And yes, he did." He straightened, seeming to come to a decision. "Miss Bennett, I don't mean to be forward, but I wonder if you might consider taking supper with me tomorrow evening. There's a decent restaurant at the hotel." Nora blinked in surprise. "You're asking to court me? After hearing I've been rejected for being destitute," Roy shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "I reckon a woman's worth isn't measured by the coins in her purse any more than a man's is. Besides," his smile widened, "I've got enough saved for a good start. If you're looking for a partnership instead of charity, that is." "Mr. Lawson, Roy, we've only just met." "True enough. But isn't that how all acquaintances begin?" He tipped his hat. "Just supper, Miss Bennett." No promises beyond good conversation. Nora hesitated. She'd come west for security, for a fresh start away from the whispers that had followed her in Boston after her father's financial ruin. Could she really consider another path so quickly? "Very well," she found herself saying. "Supper tomorrow." Roy's smile could have lit the darkest mine shaft. "I'll call for you at 6 if that suits." "It does." As she watched him mount his horse and ride away, Nora wondered what madness had possessed her to accept. Yet something about Roy Lawson's straightforward manner and kind eyes gave her a feeling she'd never experienced with Edgar's flowery letters hope. The following evening found Nora sitting across from Roy at the hotel restaurant, surprised by how easily conversation flowed between them. He told her about his work at the Triple R, how he'd started as a hand and worked his way up to foreman, then ranch manager when old Richardson's health began failing. "You must be very good at what you do," she observed, sipping the coffee that had followed their surprisingly tasty meal. "I understand cattle and horses better than most men," Roy admitted without pretense. "And I've got a knack for making things grow, been saving to buy my own spread someday." "That's admirable." Nora studied him, noting the calluses on his hands and the laugh lines around his eyes. This was a man who worked in the sun, who knew hardship but hadn't been hardened by it. "What about you?" he asked. "What brought you all the way from Boston to marry a stranger?" Nora set down her cup. "Necessity at first. When my father died and his debts came due, there were few options for a woman alone. I could become a governess, perhaps, or a companion to some elderly lady, but I wanted." She paused. "I wanted a home of my own, children someday, a fresh start where no one knew of my family's disgrace. And now I'm not certain," she admitted. "I have enough money for the stage back east, but what awaits me there? The same limited prospects, but with the added humiliation of having failed out west as well." Roy leaned forward. "Or you could stay. Sweetwater needs a schoolteacher. Mrs. Peterson's expecting and her husband wants her to give up the position." Nora's heart leapt. "A schoolteacher, but I have no formal training." "You can read and write and cipher, can't you? That's more than some around here. And you've got a proper Boston education, which the town council would value." He grinned. "Plus, it comes with a small cottage behind the schoolhouse. Nothing fancy, but it's yours as long as you hold the position. You seem to have given this considerable thought, Mr. Lawson." "I might have mentioned your situation to Mayor Wilson this morning," Roy admitted. "He said to bring you by tomorrow if you're interested." For the first time since receiving Edgar's letter, Nora felt a flicker of possibility. "Why are you helping me?" Roy's expression turned serious. "Because everyone deserves a chance to build the life they want, not just the one circumstances hand them." He hesitated before adding, And because I've never met anyone quite like you, Nora Bennett. The weeks that followed brought changes Nora could never have imagined. The town council, eager to have an educated Easterner shaping young minds, hired her on the spot. Her tiny cottage, while sparse, became a haven, the first place that had ever truly belonged to her. Roy called regularly, bringing small gifts, wildflowers, a book of poetry he'd found in Denver, a kitten from the ranch's recent litter. Their courtship progressed slowly, built on conversations that stretched into the night and Sunday rides into the foothills. He showed her hidden valleys filled with columbine and told her stories of growing up in the shadow of the mountains. "I always thought I'd leave someday," he admitted one afternoon as they sat beside a clear mountain stream. "See the ocean, maybe. But then Pa got sick, and afterward, the land just held me. There's something about putting your hands in soil that you've worked yourself that keeps a man rooted." Nora understood. She'd felt that same connection growing with her students' 27 children of varying ages who looked to her not just for reading and arithmetic, but for guidance in navigating their world. "I never thought I would find purpose in a classroom," she told him. But watching Susie Miller finally understand fractions yesterday, her whole face lit up like a lantern. "I felt as though I'd given her something precious." "You did," Roy said simply. "Knowledge is something no one can take away." It was during the Harvest Festival in October that Edgar Fairchild re-entered Nora's life. She was helping judge the pie contest when she felt a presence beside her. "Miss Bennett, you're looking well." Edgar's voice was smooth as cream, his tailored suit out of place among the town's more practical attire. "Mr. Fairchild." Nora nodded coolly, aware of curious eyes watching them. "I've been meaning to call on you," he said, lowering his voice. "I've heard you've established yourself quite admirably as our schoolmistress." "Yes, the position suits me." Edgar cleared his throat. "I wonder if we might speak privately. I believe I may have been hasty in my previous assessment of our compatibility." Nora stared at him, scarcely believing her ears. "You're suggesting you wish to renew our engagement?" "Well, yes," he smiled confidently. "I've had time to reflect, and I realize that your other qualities might well compensate for any financial limitations." Before Nora could respond, a familiar voice called her name. Roy approached, carrying 2 glasses of apple cider. "Thought you might be thirsty," he said, handing her one before nodding to Edgar. "Fairchild. Lawson." Edgar's tone cooled considerably. "Miss Bennett and I were having a private conversation." "Is that right?" Roy looked to Nora, concern in his eyes. "Everything all right?" Nora took a deep breath. "Mr. Fairchild was just suggesting that he might have been hasty in breaking our engagement. Apparently my other qualities might now compensate for my empty pockets." Roy's expression hardened, but he remained silent, clearly waiting for her to handle the situation as she saw fit. Nora turned back to Edgar. "I appreciate your reconsideration, Mr. Fairchild, but I must decline. You see, I've discovered that a man who values a woman's worth by the size of her dowry isn't worth having at any price." Edgar's face flushed. "You can't be serious. You'd rather consort with ranch hands than secure your future." "I'd rather build a future with someone who sees my true value," Nora replied steadily. "Good day, Mr. Fairchild." As Edgar stalked away, Roy touched her elbow gently. "You all right?" "Perfectly," she said, surprised to find it was true. 6 months ago, his rejection devastated me. Now I can only feel grateful for his shallow nature. It led me here to work I love and people who value me for myself." Roy's smile was slow and warm. "Including me, especially you." Nora felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "You were right that day about starting rich in love. I think I understand now what your father meant." The first snow of winter came early that year, blanketing Sweetwater Creek in white silence. Nora awoke to find her tiny cottage cold, the fire having died overnight. As she struggled to relight it with trembling fingers, a knock sounded at her door. Roy stood on her porch, a basket of provisions in one hand and an armful of firewood in the other. "Thought you might need these," he said, stomping snow from his boots. "My hero," Nora laughed, helping him inside. "The fire went out and I'm all thumbs this morning." Together they built a new fire, its warmth gradually filling the small space. Roy unpacked the basket fresh bread, preserves, a small roast for later while Nora made coffee. They sat at her tiny table, steam rising from their cups, and Roy suddenly reached for her hand. "Nora, I've been thinking." "A dangerous pastime," she teased, though her heart had begun to race. Old man Richardson's retiring for good, moving to California for his lungs. Roy's thumb traced circles on her palm. "He's offered to sell me the north section of the ranch, 200 acres, the cabin, and a small herd to start with." Nora squeezed his hand. "Roy, that's wonderful. It's everything you've been working toward. Almost everything." His eyes met hers. "The cabin's not much, 2 rooms, needs a woman's touch, but it could be a home. Our home if you wanted it to be." For a moment, Nora couldn't speak. The future she'd once sought through desperate letters to a stranger now stood before her, offered freely by a man whose heart she'd come to treasure. "Are you asking me to marry you, Roy Lawson?" "I am." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "It was my mother's. Pa gave it to her when they had nothing but dreams in each other." Tears filled Nora's eyes as he continued. "I can't promise wealth or fine things. But I can promise to work every day to build something good with you, to honor you, protect you, and love you all the days of my life." His voice roughened. "We'd be starting with little, but rich in love," Nora finished, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Yes, Roy. Yes, I will marry you." The kiss they shared tasted of coffee and promise and the future stretching before them. They married on Christmas Day, with the whole town turning out to celebrate in the small church. Nora wore a simple blue dress with her mother's cameo at her throat. Roy looked almost uncomfortable in his new suit, but his face when she walked down the aisle was worth every penny she'd spent on her dress. "I love you," he whispered as they exchanged vows, and Nora knew she'd found what all her father's money could never have bought: a partner who valued her for herself, not what she brought to the marriage. Their first year together was hard work but filled with joy. The cabin became a home under Nora's care. She continued teaching while Roy built up their herd and planted their first crops. At night, they would sit on their small porch and watch the sunset paint the mountains gold, making plans for their future. It was during one such evening, as summer waned into fall again, that Nora shared her news. "Roy," she said softly, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach, "I think we're about to become even richer." His eyes widened, then filled with tears as understanding dawned. "A baby." "You're certain?" Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. "He says February or March, most likely." Roy whooped, lifting her from her chair and spinning her around before setting her down gently, suddenly concerned. "Should I not have done that? Are you feeling well?" Nora laughed. "I'm perfectly fine. A bit tired, but the doctor says that's normal." That night, as they lay in bed with Roy's hand protectively covering her abdomen, Nora thought about the journey that had brought her here, from desperate mail-order bride to cherished wife and soon-to-be mother. "What are you thinking about?" Roy murmured, his breath warm against her neck. "How differently things might have turned out if Edgar hadn't rejected me," she admitted. "I came west seeking security, willing to marry a man I'd never met for the promise of a comfortable life. And now I know that true security isn't found in bank accounts or fine houses. It's in loving someone who loves you completely in return." She turned to face him in the darkness. "It's knowing that whatever comes, we'll face it together." "Together," Roy agreed, kissing her gently. "Always." Their daughter, Rebecca, arrived during a late February blizzard that kept Dr. Miller from reaching them in time. It was Roy who delivered her, his strong hands surprisingly gentle as he guided his child into the world and placed her in Nora's arms. "She's perfect," he whispered, awestruck as tiny fingers wrapped around his calloused thumb. "Look what we made, Nora." "She has your eyes," Nora observed, exhausted but radiant. The spring that followed brought new beginnings. Their cattle multiplied, the crops flourished, and Rebecca grew strong and curious. Nora resigned from teaching to focus on their growing ranch and daughter, though she still tutored several children whose families lived too far from town for regular schooling. On their second wedding anniversary, Roy surprised her with an addition to their cabin, a proper parlor with bookshelves for her beloved books and a rocking chair by the window. "For reading to our children," he explained, watching her explore the new space. "I'm hoping there'll be more than just Rebecca someday." Nora smiled, remembering the secret she'd been saving for this very day. "Perhaps sooner than you think," she said, laughing at his expression of delighted shock. Their son, William, joined their family the following summer, followed 2 years later by twins, Sarah and Samuel. The cabin expanded room by room as their family and prosperity grew. Roy's careful management and hard work turned their small beginning into one of the most successful ranches in the county. 5 years after their wedding, they hosted the Harvest Festival at their ranch. Nora stood on the porch, watching Roy organize the horseshoe tournament, their children playing with the other youngsters from town. Edgar Fairchild was there. He still lived in Sweetwater, though he spent most of his time in Denver, these days standing awkwardly at the edge of the festivities. Nora approached him, secure enough in her happiness to offer an olive branch. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fairchild. I'm glad you could join us." Edgar nodded stiffly. "You have a fine place here, Mrs. Lawson. You've done well for yourself." "We have," she agreed, emphasizing the we. "Though our greatest wealth doesn't show on the surface." He seemed about to say something else when Rebecca came running up, her dark hair flying behind her. "Mama, Papa says it's time for the pie judging and you promised to help." Nora smiled at her daughter. "Tell him I'll be right there, sweetheart." As Rebecca raced away, Edgar observed, "You seem happy." "I am," Nora replied simply. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." That evening, with the festivities over and their children tucked into bed, Nora and Roy sat on their porch as they had so many nights before. The moon silvered the land that had become their legacy: fertile fields, healthy cattle, the orchard they'd planted the year William was born. "Did I see you talking to Fairchild today?" Roy asked, his arm around her shoulders. Nora nodded. "He said we've done well for ourselves." Roy chuckled. "If he only knew what a bargain I got when he threw you over." "Roy Lawson." Nora swatted his arm, laughing despite herself. "It's true," he insisted, pulling her closer. "That day when you were standing in the street looking like your world had ended, I thought to myself, what kind of fool would let a woman like that slip through his fingers? So you decided to rescue me." "No," Roy turned serious. "I decided to court you properly and hope you'd see that a man without a mansion could still offer a home. That we could build something together that would be worth more than anything Fairchild could have given you." Nora rested her head on his shoulder, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "We have built something remarkable, haven't we? Not just the ranch, but our family, our life together. And we're not done yet," Roy promised. "Not by a long shot. I've been thinking about that section to the west by the creek. Might make good grazing land if we clear it." Nora smiled at his ever-present plans for expansion. "Always thinking ahead." "Have to," he said. "Got 4 children who'll need their own starts someday." They fell silent, content in each other's company and the knowledge of all they'd created from that chance meeting on a dusty street 10 years before. "You know," Nora said softly, "when Edgar rejected me for being too poor, it felt like the end of everything I'd hoped for." Roy nodded. "I remember, but now I see it was really the beginning." She turned to him, the moonlight illuminating the silver threads beginning to appear in his dark hair. "The beginning of everything that matters." "Then let's start rich in love." Roy quoted his own words from that long-ago day, his voice tender. "Remember when I said that?" "I remember everything about that day," Nora said. "It was the day my life truly began." As the crickets sang in the tall grass and their children slept peacefully inside the home they'd built together, Nora knew that the wealth they'd found couldn't be measured in dollars or acres, but in moments like these: quiet, perfect, and more precious than gold. The story of the rejected bride who found true love with a cowboy became something of a legend in Sweetwater Creek, told and retold as the Lawson family prospered through good years and lean ones. Their ranch grew into one of the largest in the county, their children raised with the values Roy and Nora held dear: hard work, honesty, and the understanding that true wealth comes from the heart. And when asked the secret to their enduring marriage, Roy would always smile at Nora and repeat the words that had changed both their lives. "We started rich in love. Everything else was just extra."